dynamic proxy. Why? Right. So the demonstration picture of what's going on here. Let's say you have an oil rig at a very remote location where there's a number of cameras which need to be monitored by experts who are typically sitting in a separate location or a centralized location somewhere else, right? And typically these kind of locations, the bandwidth is very constrained. Experts trying to view the same camera, what we'd like to do is just get one stream back into the centralized server instead of 10 connections going, right? So it's a way to optimize bandwidth utilization. It'll just get one stream from the remote oil rig into the central location and do a fan out at that point in time where you have a LAN and you have a lot more bandwidth to play around with. So think of it as a multicast at an application level essentially, right? So the details of how this works, and we'll also do a demo of how this is set up and how it is shown through our VSOM web UI and SASD. This is text of what I just described. Essentially, this is a way to optimize video streaming over low bandwidth networks where media servers are hosted remotely and we have a lot of viewers who are sitting at a centralized location. Essentially, it makes a single connection per stream for the media server sitting at the remote location, stream into the centralized location, dynamic proxy server there fans that out to a lot of viewers who want to view this. To do the set configuration and management, we use VSOM, and we'll see how that is done. And if you see the old 6x versions of VSM, it's both kind of similar and not similar to the child proxies. Child proxies, you used to be able to get a stream and just do from that stream, single stream at the single stream level, you will record that, and then you could do a child proxy for child proxy and all that good stuff. But that proxy is at a level, so all things which are coming into the server are proxied dynamically. Clear as we talk more about this, and we look at how that works. Simple deployment, very simple case here. Right in the middle of the ocean somewhere, got a few cameras, and got our experts sitting in a corporate R&D location. They've got high bandwidth internally, but connecting to the remote site, they've got bandwidth constraints. Cameras on the oil rig, there is a media server sitting on the rig which is managing those cameras. And if there's who's sitting there trying to make sure the cameras are okay while he's there, he would be able to access them through VSOM. And when he tries to view feeds from the workstation which is on the remote site, he would get his feeds from the media server which is local to that remote site. And the people who are looking at the feed at the central location, they would be connecting to the dynamic proxy server which is hosted centrally. The proxy server is making a single connection, getting the stream from the media server at the remote site, and on however number of clients want to view it, it just does all the fan out at the centralized location, right? Complicated deployment, we still have the oil rig, we got cameras there, we got a media server managing that. We also got a bridge to the oil rig, assume that, and there's some cameras over the bridge. And there are people trying to view cameras for the bridge as well. I mean, this could be used in our transportation solution. Assume have some cameras over the Bay Bridge or the San Francisco Bridge, and commuters want to look at the traffic, live traffic. So it's a very good way to do that, where one camera feed is brought into a server. Let's say 100 people are commuting in from San Jose. You'll place the server somewhere in San Jose, the dynamic proxy server. So they're connecting to that dynamic proxy server to view the feed instead of directly going to the base feed, which is available in the meter, which is at a substation under the bridge somewhere. Right? A couple cases there. So primarily this when you have locations and you want to optimize the bandwidth and get the best out of that. Let this get going. Today we need VSOM 7.5. It's a new feature with 7.5, so it will not work with the older versions. Use locations, and we'll see why as we go forward. Media server, which which is sitting at your remote location, which is managing all the cameras at that remote location. You need one dynamic proxy server, which is sitting at your central location for viewers at the centralized location, right? On all versions of VSM 7.5, what that means is now we have a separate operating system on which VSM services can run. Yesterday we talked about how the metadata server, map server, and federator only run on the 64-bit version, all the new services available with 7.5. But dynamic proxy can also work on the older 32-bit operating systems, which are deployed out there with Red Hat 5.8. There's no additional license requirement for getting the dynamic proxy going. A dynamic proxy is very similar to a media server. You would add it as you would add a media server. And options where you can just have it co-located with the media server, have it just as a dynamic proxy server. But it is, if you have a dynamic proxy server, it is counted as a media server as far as licensing is concerned. When you get your VSOM license and you plan to have a dynamic proxy server in addition to your 8 or 10 media servers, you would do a +1 for the dynamic server. So just need to mind media servers associated with the remote media server must all be at the same site. And concept introduced with 7.5 sites, and we'll look at how sites map to locations as we go forward. We've been about this as we went through the presentation. What are the advantages? It optimizes one traffic, right? From the remote location, you're only making one connection, so only one stream is coming out into the centralized location, and the fan out is being done there. If you understand the nitty-gritties of the VSM servers, the media out process is what handles the fan out to the n number of connections who are viewing it at the locations. Balancing, which goes along with the dynamic proxy servers. So if you anticipate a lot of usage of dynamic proxy, you need to use this load balancing feature available with proxy. How does it actually work, right? The step-by-step description of the whole process. A user who's trying to view the video while at a centralized location, and he's trying to view a video which is at a remote site over a low bandwidth location, right? So in that instance, I have a dynamic proxy server set up that goes to the dynamic proxy server instead of the media server which is on the remote location. So the proxy server takes and gets the video from the media server which is remote. It gets the one stream going, and once that stream comes into the dynamic proxy server, then media out takes it over on the centralized dynamic proxy server and allows you to fan out as much as you want. The thing to remember is that there's only one can open between the dynamic proxy server and the server which is at the remote location for one camera. So if you have cameras, there's 10 connections. So that's how setting that up. You would create locations, which we've been doing for a while now with VSM. Set up locations. We create what are called as sites. We'll talk more about what those are. We add a server at the remote site, which is all the cameras which are on the remote site. We add a dynamic proxy server on the centralized site, and then templates and cameras for your regular videos. When you video, depending on the location where you are, you get the video from your media server, which is in the remote site, or you get it from the centralized dynamic proxy, and we'll see a demo of that as well. How do you dynamic proxy, right? So the thing is, you configure locations and sites. We'll see that in a minute. Entities which are remote. So now there's a new resource under VSOM which allows you to do site management. We'll go through that. The media server, the dynamic proxy server as a media server, and a way to choose the mode. So you can have media server and the dynamic proxy on the same server, or if you have enough of a load for the dynamic proxy server to handle, you can just make that server as a dynamic proxy only server. And we'll do that as well. Sites are associated with existing locations. So when you think about locations, the way you would design your hierarchy, you're thinking about geography, right? So sites map to an individual location. When you think about sites, think about connectivity. Right? When a site maps to one location, and any location underneath that location, all of them have good connectivity between them, right? So that's a LAN setup. So to logical entity going, we introduced the concept of sites now. So retrain that, locations think of geography, sites think of network connectivity, and sites map to locations. Locations can have sublocations, but sites not have sublocations, subsites. I'm sorry. Right, a site is defined as a location which has proper network connectivity, and that is a remote site. Multiple remote sites, we can see how we do that, right? So depending on whichever remote site you're on, you can get into that remote site. There's options to optimize bandwidth. The whole point of doing this is because in pipe. But let's say you're handling 100 megabits per second at the remote site, and you only have a 50 megabits per second link going in to a separate or centralized location. So if you're doing motion JPEG primarily, you can skip frames. That's easy to understand. So depending on how much bandwidth, 100 to 50, it's just a skip of 2. Doing H264, which is going to be your normal case, you can skip iframes as well. So keep in mind this skips whole GOPS. On what you're doing and how much bandwidth you have, you can do the calculations to skip that amount and get the optimization of the bandwidth done as well. A bit more about load balancing. VSMS, we've had the concept of failover, which is, which it still works. Both dynamic proxy and media servers co-located, right? It is still a media server, but proxy introduces the concept of load balancing now. So a server which is at a remote site is added. The pool of D servers handle the proxies from that remote site, right? Which stream, that is not up to the user, that is managed dynamically by the software itself. But if you are going to be using a dynamic proxy heavily, it's always a good idea to get a pool of servers going as well. Users and how they map to sites. So within VSOM, we associated users with locations. So simply we can do the same thing with sites. And when it logs in, depending on what association they have, they'll be prompted to declare which site they are in. It will default to where they are. They have the option to choose where they are as well. I mean, the user does not necessarily have to be at the same location all the time. Either he could be remote or he could be at the corporate location as well. So that is changeable. We'll see how to do that. Wherever they are logging in from, that is where they'll see the live video from. So if they are on the oil rig, they are getting their video from media which is set up on the oil rig. So they are a remote user in that case. So the nomenclature, just try to get your heads around it while I show the demo especially. I'm just trying to reiterate on that again and again because it's a concept to understand. If you're outside the site, so if you're at the centralized location, you log in as not at any site and they get a video from the proxy server in that instance. When you're logging in, the two options are not in any site and my remote office site. Intuitive terms to understand, you just need to be comfortable with these facts. You can be local in a remote site. That's the most important thing remembering. You are local in a remote site, you are viewing your video from the media server on the remote site. You are in a centralized location, you are in any site, which you are getting the feed from the dynamic proxy server, which is getting the feed from the remote server by making a single connection. Can you share the location of the previous session? Yes, George. This will be sent out in an email, the recording as well as the slides. One with the session. This is the session. This is the second session on day 2. So once we are done with this, we'll be sending that out. Some definitions of dynamic proxy. Today we can only do live video. What it means is if you have a dynamic proxy only, you cannot record those videos. If you're trying to view your recordings, even though you are on send site, the request will go to the remote site directly instead of through the dynamic proxy. That's something we're looking to enhance as we go forward. But today you can only do live video dynamic proxy. So if your use case needs audio, it makes sense. If your use case allows for a little bit of bandwidth for doing a bit of viewing of recording while playing with your alerts, that is okay. You can, but you just need to be aware of designing it that there might be some traffic for recordings coming through the low bandwidth pipe if that is what you so desire. PTNs as well go directly to the remote server. This is very intensive on the bandwidth, so that's probably okay. Your concern is recorded archives. So if you have a use case where you need to use recorded archives, this might not be the relevant solution today. You need to optimize that and make the user understand that you will have to do recording viewing minimally if you're using dynamic proxy option. Numbers. Looks like there's another. Okay, nothing. I mean, we are just talking about a pure dynamic proxy server here. On the 1RU, our QA team has tested up to 200 megabits per second total. This includes incoming and outgoing streams. So a stream of 768 kbps, and they had 50 streams incoming at that rate and 200 streams outgoing. So what this means is, on average, from the remote site, there were 50 streams coming in, and each of those streams is being looked at by 4 viewers on an average. So 50 coming in, 200 streams going out. That comes under just over 200 megabits per second, and you can play with these numbers. So if you have a 1 Mbps setup, those incoming streams might go up, down, depending on how many you do incoming, your outgoing goes down. So you can play around with that 200 Mbps number. On 2, we've tested up to 300 Mbps. We can possibly go more than that. QA is continuing to work on that. So for now, work with the 300 Mbps number. As an example here, 100 incoming streams from the remote media server fanned out to 300 outgoing streams. So on an average, one stream is being fanned out to 3 users. You can do all that using one of our 2RU servers. Frames to skip for both for motion JPEG and frames. I've the supported values here. Motion JPEG can go from 1 to 1800. Right. So if you have a really low bandwidth location and you're per second on the remote site, you have bandwidth only to get 1 frame every 60 seconds. You would set that value to 1800, and you can backwards from there depending on what bandwidth you have available. With the iframes, whatever value you put in there, that's the number of iframes which are skipped. Right. Can support up to 100 dynamic proxy servers today. Another point of note. That is the limit today. Aspects, the proxy naming, it's similar to how we were doing it before when we had the child proxies. You take the name of the camera and add a couple of tags to the end. It'll be underscore proxy underscore VS1. If you debug to see which server the stream is coming from, you can use debug view to see the URL requests which are going out. And again, reiterating that only live streams are proxied through the dynamic proxy server with the 7.5 release. The way to do your debugging, look into your log files. There's no additional log file introduced. We use the current log files available. VSOM is what you would look to troubleshoot issues with your sites, etc. Standard IMS log, media log on the remote server, and your and make sure that video is streaming from the right location. HTTP access log does what it usually does, captures all the requests coming in. At P and recording viewing requests are always going to the media server, which is on the remote location. So let me show you how this is set up on VSOM. I've already logged into VSOM here. Seems to question. Let me quick check that. One has answered that. So let me make sure I have not time. So share resources now in VSOM 7.5. We've looked at maps, layers, maps editor. A couple of new things we introduced in the session on day 1. We got site management now. So for the site management, we need to make sure that locations are set up. What we got today, my Cisco today is the root location. I got San Jose 28, 29, and 30 at my centralized location, and I got a remote office, which is constrained bandwidth link. My location already defined. If I did not have a location for that, I would define it. If my remote location had sub-locations, they would just share, and I could do my site mapping accordingly. Right. Go to my system settings back, click on site management, and I already set up which maps to the remote office location. So if the remote office had any sub-locations, they would all map to the same site. If I added that, I would just click add, give it a name, location of which that site maps to. Obviously, do dynamic proxy. I'm trying to optimize the bandwidth by a factor of 2. Let me do H264. Hopefully that takes under 2. So it's not a calculation with H264 because you need to take care of the GOP size and all that. So it's more involved, and you can reach out to Lionel and me if you need more clarity on how that is done offline. Right, which is associated with the location now. And see how our media servers are set up. So my system settings. So my got a media server associated with it. You would set up any media server. If my media server settings mode now, the set to media server only. The server is on the remote side, which is on the side of the low bandwidth location, right? So that is going to be the media server only. This is all using the local cameras on the remote location. They have no issues there with bandwidth, so this is to be working with bandwidth feeds on the local side itself. Proxy server. Go back first. I'll go to my centralized location, and I here which make dynamic proxy server. So again, proxy server is in the centralized location. What we've chosen the option is both. So this is functioning as a media server only, which means the feeds which are set up as recording as streams on this media server locally, they can record, but whatever is coming over the pipe from the low bandwidth location is handled by the dynamic proxy for live viewing only. You cannot take those feeds and record again here. Right? There's a feed, so if you have a few feeds, you get the option of co-locating both the dynamic server and the media server, but you are getting into the range of 50s and 100s, you should look into having a separate dynamic proxy by itself. Let's get it. First, log into VSOM. When you have site set up, you would be the question, do you want to be logged in as? So if I click on that, this is the screen you would see. Chosen not in any site because I'm the central location, and that is what is reflected on the top right here. Right? If I'm logged in from the oil rig, I would choose my remote office as my root location. Now I'm location, which means that when I try to view a feed from my remote server from the oil rig, it will dynamic proxy request. So let's see what happens. To reconnect, that's the message you see. The thing for that is these are suspended proxies on the dynamic proxy server. These aren't live connections. When you request to see, that is when the dynamic proxy server turns around and makes a request to the server which is on the remote setup, and that is when it gets the stream. So you see a little bit of lag before the stream shows up. So that's one way to know if you are at this location or if you are on the remote site, which is across low bandwidth site. Now let's see what happens when I change my location. It's easy to change. I just click on the site. I'm changing my location to remote site because let me just browse away from that for a minute. Let me go now. You see that it's instantaneous. This is because this feed is coming from the local media server on the remote site. Very important to understand that you are at the local location on the remote office site. So dynamic proxy works. Let me quickly check if there's any questions. With me, get the questions going, please. If it's not clear what we're talking about, if not today, we can answer over email or reach out to us offline as well. But important to understand and reach out if you need any help around designing with dynamic proxy. Some questions which came out during the attack training we did a couple of weeks ago. And this was a good part for a lot of people. Why do we need sites when we have locations? So make it clear before. When you think of locations, think about geography. That's what you do typically. When you think sites, think about network connectivity. Your logical entity, which is a site, has good network connectivity across the site. And the remote site, because the connectivity that to the centralized location is a low bandwidth link. So this is why I differentiate that and introduce this new asset into VSOM now. The question was, what happens when a media server is set as dynamic proxy and media server? Increase the load and you want to make it a dynamic proxy server by itself. What happens to the camera configs and recordings? So VSOM, if you have existing configurations, VSOM ensures that you remove cameras and encoders, and hopefully you've reconfigured them if needed on a different media server. When you remove all the devices, does VSOM let you switch to a dynamic proxy only mode. If the dynamic proxy server fails and I am not at the remote site, what happens? Does it automatically make a connection to the remote site to get the feed? The answer is no. You will not see a feed. VSOM will say that you cannot see the feed from a remote site to the location. You need to change your location. The workaround for that is you change your location as being on remote site, and then you'll get the direct connectivity. But you need to be aware that you're taking